Okay, I think we're ready to get underway. A very warm welcome to the launch webinar for INTBAU's Architecture Challenge. I'm Harriet Wenberg, Executive Director of INTBAU, which is a global network dedicated to creating better places to live. I'm in London for this launch session with all of you joining us from, and it's such an impressive list of countries that I am going to run through just some of them. You're joining us from over 38 countries, in fact, in total. So we have Algeria, Australia, Barbados, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Finland, France, Germany, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Namibia, Nepal, Nigeria, Norway, Pakistan, Peru, the Philippines, Portugal, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Venezuela, amongst others. So a very, very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you're joining from. The INTBAU Architecture Challenge is a competition for low carbon, no carbon, and carbon negative designs for resilient and adaptable houses. The design competition is going to launch later this year alongside COP26, the UN climate conference that's due to take place in November. But starting today and continuing each month until next April, we're running an interactive series of webinars. The Architecture Challenge is about both words and actions. The webinar series will help encourage thought and discussion, leading to greater knowledge and strong submissions to the design competition from participants who choose to enter. We're also hoping and wanting built results from the Architecture Challenge, and we're looking for opportunities now to be able to construct and test the winning designs to the Architecture Challenge in situ, in the contexts for which they're intended, in the context for which you, the participants, will design them. So before going on to give some background for today's session, I wanted to offer thanks to our sponsors, the sponsors of the Architecture Challenge, Alireza and Mina Sagarchi, and Stanhope Gate Architecture. So today's session, the launch, is going to focus on architecture's responsibility and opportunity to better serve both people and planet. Up to 40% of global carbon emissions are directly and indirectly influenced by built environment sectors. This session's 4 speakers will help us consider the scale and scope of the challenges we face today and the opportunity they represent for those designing and building to be part of the solution to the climate crisis, providing better homes, shelters, houses, and housing in the process. So I'll introduce each of our speakers in turn with a very short bio, and there's more about each of them that can be found on the Architecture Challenge website, which is challenge.intbau.org. We'll have questions and answers from you to close the session, so please type those into the Q&A box on Zoom as we go along, and also at the end when we get to that section. And there's the chat feature that's there as well, which you can use for comments, for greetings as we go along as well. But use the Q&A box for any questions you have for our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Mina Hasman. Mina works with, amongst others, the UK Green Building Council, the Royal Institute of British Architects Ethics and Sustainable Development Leadership Group, and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction COP26 Task Force. And Mina has also developed Climate Framework, which is a cross-disciplinary initiative to unite building industry and academia for climate action. And there's more on that on the Architecture Challenge website. So there's lots more I could say about Mina because she does a huge number of very interesting and impressive things. But I will hand over there, Mina, and let you lead us off with the first talk of today.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Harriet. And I'm thrilled to be here joining you on this event today. I just want to make sure that you can all hear me well and also see my screen.
We can see it.
Perfect, thank you. So thank you again for inviting me to be a part of today's exciting event. I would like to start by saying that in this crucial decade of climate action, we cannot simply advocate for a resilient future unless we are demonstrating the change we want to see ourselves within the built environment sector. We must really collectively transform the buildings we design, build, and occupy so that we can shape a better future for us and the generations to come. I'm therefore thrilled that INTBAU is launching the Architectural Challenge today to show how architecture and design can be a part of the solution to the climate crisis. In a quest to build a better future, we should not lose sight of the urgency that the context of reality presents today, where climate change is already showing signs with unfortunate storms, floods, sea level rises, and heat waves, currently risking livelihoods of 2.4 million people just in the UK. where the planet's natural ecosystem is also degrading every day, with 1 million species currently threatened with extinction. We're in a time where the anticipated population growth by 2.4 billion people within the next 30 years is already demanding intense densification of our existing cities today. And in order to respond to that population growth, 230 billion square meters of buildings will be constructed and or renovated in cities all around the world. Failure to manage this rapid urbanization and urban growth well will inevitably bring risks of profound social instability with increased poverty, inequity, and vulnerability in societies all around the world. And the cities we're helping build and densify today are already responsible for almost 40% of the annual global greenhouse gas emissions. When coupled with heat waves, among other phenomena, they will also continue to pose growing health risks. So our responsibility as designers and built environment professionals goes beyond just minimizing our negative impact on the planet, and it embraces safeguarding our own health for the future. Over the recent years, we have been asking ourselves, our climate and the world are changing. Why shouldn't we? Such change would require realignment of focus and priorities, and it would embrace an integrated, interdisciplinary, and iterative design process, a new, perhaps, a re-emphasized process which we can leverage in order to deliver holistic solutions that are long-lasting and that do not result in any unintended consequences. So how does this new process look like? With the focus on delivering truly sustainable built environments, the process must be structured around working towards specific outcomes, with metrics as some of which are seen here. This new, or as I mentioned before, perhaps a re-emphasized process must also replace the traditional linear approach that we see today with a much more organic and iterative one, so that we can effectively address a multitude of challenges in tandem, which sometimes demand a collective and holistic response to competing priorities, such as designing airtight buildings for maximized energy efficiency, which can increase overheating risk and in turn impact occupant health. So our process, therefore, really needs to effectively respond to this push and pull that we will inevitably already seeing and continue to see in our projects moving forward. This iterative design process would yield successful outcomes if we can challenge today's briefs for tomorrow. In other words, if we can consider the implications of a project provided for a built environment design today and evaluated whether it is fit for purpose for the emerging needs of 2030, 2040, 2050, and even beyond. For such process to be effective, we must also identify outcomes, namely the targets I mentioned before, that are very specific to the context and to the project's needs. And it's important that we will align these outcomes within the wider stakeholder and project team in terms of aligning expectations in the projects. Now, I have previously mentioned our industry's needs to address a multitude of challenges in tandem. With these additional layers that are now being added onto our projects, understanding the impact of our design decisions almost every step of the way should be a fundamental driver influencing our design process. This is especially important so that we can close feedback loops and help inform not only the next stages of that same project, but also others to come. In this manner, we can continuously learn from previous experiences and elevate our work. With a clear definition of the end goal, in this example of 35 kilowatt hours per square meter per year as an isolated operational energy target, just to make the point, and with a rigorous evaluation process in place of our design decisions along every step of the way, we can really build confidence that and ensure that the intended outcomes at design stage can really become a reality, not only when the building is completed, but also throughout its life. And even if our project performance may slightly fluctuate at various project stages, by safeguarding that specific end goal target, the outcome, and by confirming it at the end of each project stage, we will be able to ensure that we consistently remain on the right path and trajectory. Now, I would like to conclude by saying that all in all, we're in an era where people's well-being and planetary health must be balanced in an act, where designing for specific and holistically sustainable outcomes are imperative for a thriving future for us all, and where not only our designs, but also our processes across the industry need to change so that we can meaningfully respond to the greatest challenges of our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mina. That was a very clear call to action and look at where we need to get to and how we might get there. So I hope lots of participants on today and who are going to join the challenge will look at Climate Framework and some of the other resources that are out there to engage and be part of the change that needs to happen. Thank you very much. Off and underway. Going to come to our second speaker, Eric Cesal. Eric leads and teaches on the Sustainable Environmental Design program at UC Berkeley. And he's also Special Projects Director with the Curry Stone Foundation. And Eric, over 2.5 years, curated and hosted 125 episodes in the Social Design Insights podcast series, I think all of which is maybe available to listen into in a back catalogue online, which is very, very well worth doing. Eric, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. Let me share my screen and present. Are you looking at the presentation or the notes page?
We can see your notes page,
Okay.
or with what's coming up next.
Yeah. There, how about that? That's my name.
Perfect. Yes.
There we go. Okay, Harriet already covered this part. So this is what I do. I work for the Curry Stone Foundation, which is a foundation that supports social impact design, as well as teaching at UC Berkeley. And given the content of the day, I wanted to go through 5 things, just a brief origin story and some of the values that inform my work. And then the spheres of my work, which are really in rebuilding and disaster reconstruction, advocacy, and pedagogy. So to start with origins, you know, my architectural career came into being during a very heroic time in architecture. You know, I went to school in the late 90s, and this was a time when, you know, architects were on the cover of Time magazine, and we were designing all these incredible things that the world had never seen before. It was a very exciting time, especially if you were young and naive as I was. But, you know, architects were designing tea kettles, this one by Michael Graves, Entire Cities, this one by Rem Koolhaas. And this layered well on top of my childhood imagination about what an architect was. I was a child of the 80s, and I grew up on movies from the 70s. And, you know, to me in the movies, an architect was always this kind of heroic figure. This is Paul Newman in The Towering Inferno, Charles Bronson in the Death Wish movies, Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men. And, you know, even when the movie wasn't about architecture or the architect being an architect, they were still portrayed in these ways where, you know, they were brave, they were uncompromising, they were just. So, you know, I started with these kind of very heroic ideas, and I got to architecture school, and they tried to reprogram me and tell me that things like this were brave, right? That to draw things in a quirky way was bravery. And, you know, this was just, you know, bringing design to the masses and allowing all of us to partake in Michael Graves' design was somehow an act of justice and democracy and all these things. And, you know, it never really set well with me. I struggled for about the first 10 years of my career to kind of reconcile those ideas. And it came to a head during the Great Recession, which is where my values were forged. And, you know, if my career had a jumping off point, it was really this. It was during the Great Recession when I graduated and found out that, you know, architects had the highest rates of unemployment for any profession. This data is from the UK, but I think it was The Nation that surveyed something like 380 different professions, and, you know, architects, in terms of their increased unemployment claims, came in dead last. And that was a wake-up call for me and kind of set the foundation for my career, to really understand that, hey, wait a minute, the world does not perceive design as a valuable thing. And I, like most of you, knew in my heart that it was. So my career has really been a struggle to demonstrate the value of design, the value of architecture, specifically by setting it into practice, solving humanitarian problems. Before I did all that, I wrote a book about it. It was called Down Detour Road. It's a very short book and has been pirated so many times. I'm sure you can find it online for free somewhere. But if you buy it, it's like $12, and I get, you know, $1. So thank you in advance if you do. But basically, the point of the book was that, you know, people stopped caring about design somewhere. They stopped caring about design because design stopped caring about people. And during the 1980s, we really shifted design generally and architecture specifically to be this sort of novelty, you know, where we sort of like made bright, shiny things at the indulgence of wealthy people. Oh, there's someone in the chat. Oh, that's not for me. Okay, I'll carry on. Anyway, so that kind of set the foundation for a lot of the things that I did afterwards, is trying to find a way to make design valuable in the world. And that led to my career in disaster reconstruction. So I started disaster reconstruction when I was still a graduate student. Hurricane Katrina struck the United States. So I used my summers when I had off from school to go down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast and to New Orleans and help with the rebuilding. Those of you who are students on this call, please take a note. You do not have to wait until you graduate to start your career. You can start living your values now. You already have valuable skills to contribute. And it was a wake-up call. I mean, I think that we tend to take the built environment for granted, and there are certain things that you learn only after that environment has been removed. So in these disaster zones, and I've worked a dozen major disasters in my life, once the built environment is scoured away, you develop, I think, a much more emotional and psychic appreciation for all the things that the built environment does for us, emotionally, psychologically, economically, and these sorts of things. And, you know, these are the things that people are going to lose as a result of climate change. It's not just about physical structures. And as you enter this competition and as you design, I want everybody to remember that you know, you're not just redesigning an object, you're redesigning all of the systems around that object, hopefully in a more fair and equitable way. Subsequent to that, I was asked to lead Architecture of Humanities Response in Haiti and deployed there in 2010. And that became a much more expansive program, certainly in part because the disaster was much more extensive. The destruction was nearly total in Port-au-Prince and the surrounding areas. And it was an intimidating challenge, but aligned with my values and the values of my colleagues. So, you know, we got an office, we rented an office, and we built a team. I think at the time it was fairly progressive, in as much as there's about a third international volunteers, about a third Haitians, and about a third from the Haitian diaspora. And we worked in architecture, planning, community development. Something about design is that in school, they teach you to design the thing, you know, the landscape, the building, whatever it is. You can use your design skills to design. So that's what I always saw us doing down there, is that, you know, we were designing new ways of designing, and it yielded incredible things. You know, we managed to produce, I think, 12 schools, a number of clinics, about 50 projects overall. That were all generated out of this, you know, kind of community-driven office in Port-au-Prince. We relied heavily on the resources that were there. That was another kind of distinction of the model. I'm sad to say that it was unusual at that time, and maybe perhaps still is, to rely on local artisans and local vendors and local contractors. We hired 100% local contractors in an environment where I think 96% of the rebuilding contracts went to foreign firms. I think this is critical for any response to climate change and adaptation. You have to begin with the resources that are there, and the resources are always human. So we developed a variety of training programs in conjunction with the building that we were doing. And I share this now because I think that's also going to be an important part of the competition that you're doing. You know, what human capital are you generating as a result of the design that you do? You can design a perfect prefabricated shelter or house to be manufactured somewhere in a factory and then just airdropped on site. That will do nothing for the people that live there. If you can design your projects in a way that amplify, educate, inspire, this sort of thing, you're actually bringing much more to the table than just some physical object. Case in point, this was a CAD seminar that we developed, and we found that there were a lot of Haitian engineers who wanted to participate in all those rebuilding contracts, but the job descriptions always said, you know, must know AutoCAD, must know Revit, must know BIM, that sort of thing. So we recruited some trainers from Autodesk in San Francisco and brought them down to Port-au-Prince and just had free CAD classes. That's not something I was taught to do in architecture school, but it is something that I did as a designer and someone who was focused on designing better futures. After that, I moved to Japan and took the lead on the reconstruction there after the tsunami, eventually Hurricane Sandy, Typhoon Haiyan. And my own work evolved as my team grew. My team was honestly doing much more of the work than I was, and I was increasingly positioned as a kind of advocate for different ways of rebuilding and different ways of reconstruction. And it was a natural segue to my current career as a teacher and kind of a talking head. But I feel that, design itself is an act of advocacy. And every time you put pen to paper, you're advocating for something. And you need to be very, very conscious about what that is. My work in advocacy, my belief that, we as designers have a role in arguing for different ways of doing things other than just designing whatever it is that we're designing, led to my work with the Curry Stone Foundation. And the Curry Stone Foundation has a variety of initiatives, some of which I'm involved in. But the one that's probably critical here, and Harriet already mentioned it, was Social Design Insights, which was, to my knowledge, the first podcast and radio show on social impact design. And we're very, very fortunate to collect hundreds of social impact designers and get them to tell their stories. Myself and my original co-host, Emiliano Gondolfi, he's a curator, he's based in the Netherlands. We knew that there were many more social impact designers out there than people thought there were. And if your career has been anything like mine, when you started this work, you thought you were the only one doing it. All artists are Jeff Koons and all architects are Frank Gehry, and that's just the way that things are organized. As you continue to do this work, and especially with the help of institutions like INTBAU, you realize there's a lot of people out there doing this stuff. So as you enter the competition, take a minute to learn what other people have done, what inspires other people, because there's a lot of good work going on out there. The podcast was a wonderful experience to curate and to organize and to record. And, we got to talk to brilliant designers. This building was done by El Borde, and it's a school, and it was done for $300. It remains one of my favorite projects because, they just kind of went into community and said, hey, what do you need? And they started working with the resources that were there, the environmental resources and the human resources. And to me, that's where the most successful and sustainable projects actually come from. I believe this one is actually one of Yasmeen's, who you'll hear from in a little bit. Yasmeen was on the show and to date remains one of my favorite episodes and one of my favorite people for the work that she has done in poor and rural communities and after disasters and that sort of thing. Mohammed Rezvan is a Bangladeshi architect who designs boats on schools. And I'm certain that he did not, as I did not, learn how to design boats in schools. But one of the clever things about being a designer is that you can take that creativity and that synthetic ability and really just expand it outward to solve whatever problem is standing in front of you. And we have some big ones. That segues pretty well into my teaching career and my pedagogy. My pedagogy is informed by my years in disaster zones, as well as in the conversations that I've had over the last half decade with social designers all over the world. And I try and bring that into the classroom. And in my classroom, we kind of do two things. We do disaster stuff and we do kind of general sustainable design stuff, but they're united in a mandate to solve problems. So, the sustainable design end, I always encourage my students to design systems and not things. There's a premium placed in the design world on designing things, because when you design a thing, you can put it in a magazine and, someone can put your name on it, you can get an award and this sort of thing. The benefits of a system are much harder to quantify, but they're much more important. So, my students are always tasked with looking systemically at ecology, sociology, transportation patterns, climate patterns, population patterns, all of these things, and developing, very holistic solutions to a particular problem. The object that comes out of that usually sorts itself out. right? And, I think if you design the system well, the object that comes with it is usually beautiful. I think I stole that quote from Buckminster Fuller. At any rate, on the disaster side, most of my classes always start with this image. I love this image. It's from a radar map for Hurricane Ophelia in 2017. And the reason that this is squared off here to the upper right is because the computer forecasting model had never contemplated a hurricane going that far north and that far east. So it didn't know what to do, so it didn't actually render the hurricane itself. That's how rapidly our climate is changing. This is 4 years ago, and up until that time, we didn't really understand a hurricane hitting Ireland. This is a big challenge that's in front of you, that's been set up by INTBAU. And things are changing fast. And I think we need to be adaptable, and we need to be brave in thinking about 50 years, 100 years, 200-year futures. The good news is that we have plenty of precedent. So when I teach about disaster, I usually teach about the symbiotic relationship that we've had. Since Nile River Delta civilizations, humanity has always had a symbiotic relationship with disaster. A disaster happens, and then we adapt, we learn things from it. We start designing our cities differently. We start designing our buildings differently. The citywide fire used to plague humanity. It was the big disaster that everybody worried about. We've essentially designed it out of existence with some kind of clever materials and different building regulations and this sort of thing. Thinking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire in 1910. Sparked huge public outcry. And then, we had different kinds of building codes, and now we see sprinklers all over the world in nearly every building. I'm running up against time, but I'd like to close with two kind of inspirational student projects, hopefully, as you move forward. This was done by a student team a couple of years ago, and they went to a small town in Oregon in the United States that was under tsunami risk. So they were projected to have a tsunami of about 15 meters high. And they went and interviewed the townsfolk and the mayor and everything like that. They said, okay, well, what are you going to do? And it turns out people weren't going to do anything. Like, the scale of the problem was just so enormous that they didn't really see any way that they could live around it. And so they sort of put it out of mind. And I think we do that with a lot of climate related phenomena. So they designed a building that would essentially sit in the center of town and be a marker. So it's tough to see in this picture, actually, now that I'm looking at it, but the outside of the building actually has markers for where the inundation levels are, so that they can kind of constantly keep it in the center of their mind that they are at risk, right? And they have to make policy decisions and housing decisions and land use decisions with knowledge of that risk. We cannot afford to be naive. We cannot afford to close our eyes in the midst of this climate emergency. Another project surrounded the Syrian refugee crisis, and I'm really running out of time. Essentially, one of my students went through and looked at all of the factors that kind of went into the Syrian refugee crisis and the kind of climate related factors that made this what some people call the first climate change war, and then tried to understand where the next climate change war was going to happen. And through this analysis, she found very, very vulnerable areas related to the decommissioning of the petrochemical economy and what's going to happen to these areas when that economy falls apart, and then designed around that and kind of designed a new civilization basically to accommodate this massive change. So being respectful of time, takeaways, I would say that design is valuable. You need to treat it as such. What you're doing is important. So treat it as seriously as you treat anything. Include everyone. Your designs will be better when you collect all of that input as broadly as possible. And design for systems and not objects. And apologies for running over, Harriet, but that's my shtick. Thank you all very much for attending, and good luck with the competition.
Eric, that's absolutely no problem. I think we're getting through all of that in the time you did, to be commended. So no problem whatsoever. That was great to have a look into the narrative behind getting into and continuing with design for a balance of people and planet in mind, and some great advice there too for everyone who'll enter the competition. So thanks for that very much. Coming on to our third speaker, we have Elsie Owusu next. And Elsie, to introduce her very briefly, is a long-standing council member for the Royal Institute of British Architects and also an advocate and campaigner for equality and inclusion within the architectural profession, to which end Elsie also set up the Architecture Incubator Initiative. And she's going to be talking us through some of her architectural projects and insights and work that she's done in a few different countries around the world. So we're going to get slides up for you, Elsie, and then it will be over to you.
Thank you so much. And just to say that both the talks have been really inspirational, and a lot of the points made part of my own architectural philosophy, if you like. So I'm going to talk about the work that we've done in Ghana as a practice, and also as a small company called Just Ghana. Our work started in about 2000 when the Ghanaian government invited the Society of Black Architects to come to Ghana and talk to Ghanaian architects and exchange ideas. So the first real challenge we had, and it was quite a shock, was to realize that there had just recently been floods in Ghana, and which had led to 14 people losing their lives in Accra. We had absolutely no idea, and having grown up as a Ghanaian in London, I had no idea that flooding in Accra was such a major challenge. So over the years, and you can see here a program for 2008, we have held a series of conferences and events in Accra and elsewhere in Ghana. This was a conference held at the British Council Accra, 2008, called Turning the Tide. And we came to realize that the work that we were doing, we were trying to do, the work that we were interested in to do with climate change and climate emergency was across the disciplines. So we've been working with artists and architects, social scientists, medics. And what we're aiming for now is that working in rural and urban locations, that all our teams should be integrated and have a range of skills, including transportation. Next slide, please. So looking at traditional housing, some of which is still being built. You know, these homes are very intricate. They obviously very close to the climate, well adapted, and they require a lot of skill, but they are sustainable and they are resilient. And to the top right-hand side, you have a modern take on these traditional houses, which are to the north of Ghana, which are not necessarily the most successful replicas. Next slide, please. And just to say that the Ghanaian economy is growing very, very fast. And it's, you know, Accra is like the Wild West out there. There are tall buildings of all descriptions, the planning codes, which are very good and not necessarily adhered to. And to my eye, this is probably not the kind of import, architectural import, that we should be encouraging. But this is a very popular product. Lots of people admire this kind of architecture. And I think that our challenge is to come up with alternatives and make those alternatives equally aspirational and desirable. Next slide, please. So looking at what's happening out of the centres, looking at how sustainability is being taken into account. This is a school which is being built in the western region of Ghana by a team which includes Arab the engineers, using local labor, using local materials, and working with children and young people so that the ideas which are being fostered are being spread from the young people to their parents and shared with the whole community. Next slide, please. So one of the locations that we work in Accra is Jamestown, and it is the most fantastic place. If you ever go to Ghana, please visit Jamestown. It is the most vibrant of places, quite poor. Jamestown used to be the main port of Accra, and the port was shifted after independence to Tema. So it went from being one of the wealthiest parts of Accra to losing its economic livelihood. And as a result of that, the levels of poverty are extremely high. It's a place which needs a lot of regeneration, but for some reason doesn't, although it's very, very close to the center of the capital, and as we call it, the heart of Old Accra, it hasn't received the kind of attention from government that it really deserves. And as you can see here, Eric was talking about systems. Systems are extremely poor. So increasingly, we steer away from what I would call, providing housing as a product and looking at whether people have toilets and bathrooms in their houses. How, in a very, very dense area like Jamestown, can you provide people with the basic facilities, toilets, washrooms? How can you shoehorn those systems into a place which is so, needs so much care and attention, but where the resources are so low? So this is one of the major challenges in the urban areas. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so looking at traditional houses, looking at how the tradition of building with rammed earth and local materials, thatch, straw, looking at how ventilation works, looking at how family relationships were built into the structure of traditional architecture. And I think that as we move forward, whether we are building houses in factories or making them on site, I think we really need to start from the ground, talking to local people about what their aspirations are, what their needs are, and particularly working with children and young people to retain those traditions. Next slide, please. So there are lots and lots of really exciting things going on in Ghana, lots of energy, lots of talented people experimenting and making new buildings with traditional materials, using rammed earth, using timber, more aluminium roofs than I'd like, but you can see here Kwame Dahir and Joel Asen of Hive Earth, who are based in Accra, are doing really interesting work. Next slide, please. So what we do at Just Ghana is we do the bits that everybody else doesn't really want to do. We use our own money. We don't generally apply for grants. So we use very small amounts of money and we piggyback on work that other people are doing. So this is a community toilet for a small village of, well, it's a town actually, of about 2,000 people where there are no community toilets. Most people don't have toilets in their houses. So what we've done is we've come in and provided expertise, a little bit of money, and put together a local team, always insisting that young people come in as apprentices to help the electricians, fantastically skilled people. in the villages. What we do is we support the efforts and help to finish things that may have started but have not had the resources, that people haven't had the resources to finish. So this is in Kunkunru, up in the hills, in the Akwapim Hills, the half-finished community toilet, which we're now supporting with a little bit of money, and our wonderful team of young people who are architects and social scientists and medics and all sorts of wonderful things, who turn their hand to supporting the village in their efforts. Next slide, please. Last couple of slides is work that we're doing in the UK, which is where we start really, which is about community, about really close engagement, really close consultation. And this is a project that we did working with an artist called Peter Blake as a small house in Hackney for a young couple. Well, they were in those days, they're not so young now. But this was a house which was made off-site, which is and constructed, well, made in a factory, constructed on site. And we're trying to bounce those technologies between here and Ghana, using passive house, super insulation, air tightness, which is obviously you don't necessarily want in Ghana. But I think, as Eric says, it's about systems and it's about ways of thinking rather than making products. Next slide, please. Again, this is a project that we're working on at the moment, which is for houses, zero carbon houses. And the wonderful thing about being an architect, which people don't tell you about, is that you can work between countries and cultures. So this project is being done between Ghana, Kumasi in Ghana, St. Leonard's on Sea, London and Beijing in China, obviously. It's just miraculous the way architects can work together and can change the way that we think about things just by communicating with each other. And COVID has taught us that we can work together really, really fast, really efficiently, and hopefully make a difference wherever we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsie, and a good reminder of the silver linings of COVID and the pandemic, that we're all assembled together online through Zoom, because this last year has made that essential for us to be able to gather this way. Thank you for that, getting us into some of the practical technical details of projects, and a good inspiring source of ideas, certainly for some that will enter the design competition later this year. There's lots to be learned from Ghana, and I hope that we'll have some submissions to the competition from architects in Ghana. Going to come now to our last speaker of this session, Yasmeen Lari. Yasmeen is co-founder and CEO of the Heritage Foundation of Pakistan and chair of INTBAU Pakistan, the founder chair of INTBAU Pakistan. And Yasmeen is known in Pakistan and internationally for her work at the intersection of architecture and social justice. And if that all sounds like a lot and very impressive, well, that's just what she's done since retirement from practice as Pakistan's first female architect and also architect. Yasmeen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Harriet, for this kind introduction. So hello, everybody, and greetings from Pakistan. Thank you so much, Harriet and Juliet, for the opportunity to discuss the challenges being confronted by the architectural profession today. Let me try to see if I can get my slides going. There we are. Is that okay? Can you see it all?
Perfect.
Good. So I think the important message that INTBAU Challenge conveys is that we all must endeavor to lower the carbon footprint wherever possible. So why can't I make it go? Oh, there we are. So many of these challenges have already been mentioned by eminent speakers, and in no particular kind of order. For me, these range from climate change, unprecedented recurring disasters, uncontrolled GHG emissions, which is greenhouse gas emissions, as you know, rising poverty levels and increasing disparities, unchecked population growth, along with the struggle to overcome the imperatives of COVID-19. I believe that in today's world, the lines are blurred between the North and the South, the first and the third worlds. Each part of the world is confronted with similar issues of economic stagnation, depletion of the Earth's resources, homelessness, and the state's helplessness to provide succor to those in need. In this scenario where billions of people are either unserved or underserved, there is the opportunity for built environment professionals to provide leadership for achieving a more equitable and humanistic world where well-being of each individual, regardless of status or wealth, becomes paramount. As I've said on numerous occasions, architects must no longer crave to design only for the 1%, who, according to economist Thomas Piketty, have accumulated the most wealth. And while we all dream to become prima donna architects, I would like to put it to you that focus on building iconic structures may no longer be relevant. I don't believe that we need to wait to be commissioned by the 15th century Medicis of Florence, nor the merchant princes of East India Company, or the exploitative multinationals. In my view, our clients could increasingly be the vast number living at the bottom of the pyramid or BOP. For architects could still be starchitects by leading the movement for the creation of well-designed alternatives to fulfill the vast array of unmet needs of those who live on the borders in all countries. We need to devise strategies to serve communities by promoting aspects of self-building and co-building, and using social impact funding to help disadvantaged sections of society. For it is the majority that are seeking good design to attain a better quality of life. And never underestimate the value of design for those who really have nothing or have very little resources. As the introduction to this challenge correctly points out, there is a shortfall of several billion safe homes around the world. This, of course, means that a vast number of people need well-designed, sustainable, safe, and affordable structures for housing and social infrastructure, which consists, as you know, for health and education and all the rest of it. The response to these needs provides unlimited opportunities to all of us, architects and other built environmental professionals. We must also remember that in the face of this daunting task, the Western charity model and UN cluster system have failed to provide sustenance to majority of population of the world. Unless we adopt a variant strategy to empower communities by treating the poorest of the poor as partners and sharing knowledge of how to build safer using locally sourced materials, in my view, marginalized sections, especially women, have no hope to achieve a dignified existence in their lives. And this is something that both Eric and Elsie have actually pointed out. So let's see. For the last 16 years, I've been engaged in humanitarian architecture based on low and zero carbon techniques for over 50% of the population in my country that lives below the poverty line. In order to lift disadvantaged communities out of their apathetic state and reliance on handouts, in the last years, I have devised a stratagem known as Barefoot Social Architecture, or BASA, which seeks to foster a culture of empowerment and self-reliance. In the pursuit of social and ecological justice, BASA promotes designs that draw upon ancient wisdoms and vernacular traditions that also tread lightly on the planet. As the slide shows, through BASA strategy, we were able to provide assistance to 100,000 plus persons per year, at the same time targeting 12 out of 17 SDGs, as you know, their Sustainable Development Goals. So what is BASA? First, maximizing the potential of existing barefoot ecosystem. Believe it or not, there's a huge barefoot ecosystem of the poor. Applying 3 zeros: zero cost to the donor, zero carbon, and zero waste. Methodologies that I believe will lead to zero poverty. Secondly, focus on social and ecological justice through humanistic architecture, fostering pride, dignity, and well-being, and preventing depletion of the planet's resources. They are intangible factors which also must be taken in account when we build for the poor particularly. Third, delivery of unmet needs. There are so many of them. Elsie pointed out about toilets. My God, there's just, there are no toilets in my country anywhere for the poor. So there's just so many things that need to be done, which are just not there. And we can all help to make sure that people get those unmet needs. So there is the Barefoot Incubator for Social Good and Environmental Sustainability that we've designed for training in self-building or co-building and affordable products for unmet needs of the bottom of the pyramid. And then fourthly, non-engineered structures for shrinking the ecological footprint using green skills and sustainable locally sourced materials. Now, I just wanted to introduce the barefoot ecosystem to you. There's just a lot that is there. And I think if we start maximizing it and take advantage of it, this is the parallel economy that exists. And this can empower disadvantaged communities through training and knowledge sharing. We don't have to give them handouts. We need to give them the knowledge to be able to do things themselves also. They are quite capable, even though they might be non-rich and maybe very poor. And so based on BASA tenets, a pilot we conducted in 2019 for 230 members of beggar communities in MAKLI, we found that 70% rose above the poverty line within 14 months. So there's a huge potential there because the whole population is so big. So I just thought I'll just repeat, and this has been said earlier, earlier by Mina and as well as by Harriet, that 40% of world energy is being consumed by building industry, but there's also 16% of world water usage. There's 3 billion tons of raw material, 15 to 20% of waste stream, and you can see how high the energy requirement is for steel and Portland cement and even ceramic brick. And I really now have stopped using it completely. I do not use any cement or steel at all. So as we go forward, I just wanted to introduce you to my two gurus. One, of course, is my Lime guru. And I'm putting it to you because we have to work together to lower the carbon footprint for the sake of humanity. In order to achieve sustainability in construction, this is what I'm following. As I said, my first guru is Marcus Vitruvius, and as you know, he's the 1st century Roman architect and author of treatise 10 books of architecture. And then the second one that I follow is the Earth guru, Hassan FATHY, who is a 20th century architect and author of Architecture for the Poor, who envisioned, a century ago as to what was needed. And then, of course, there's my palette of zero carbon materials. There's earth, lime, and bamboo. And you can see these three elements have so many attributes and can really build sustainable structures. And we can use them really very well. Also, I want to point out that lime is a very good stabilizer for earth. It's not been used very much in humanitarian architecture, but it's been used, of course, in conservation. And lime and earth are a fantastic combination. We do not need any cement at all. And so I thought I'll just share with you very quickly some of the work that I've been trying to do in zero carbon construction in the last years. And so this was really in the earthquake. It's low carbon. We were looking at the debris that was there from the earthquake, and we had timber there and so on. So really, this is all reuse of material that already existed, and you can see that it built really very strong buildings. Then this is the first one that I did with bamboo. Started using it in 2009, but as you can see, I'm using this cross bracing, which is really something that is traditionally used in the north. But instead of wood, I use bamboo, and that has given us very good dividends all through these years. And then I wanted to show you this particular one, which is the log, which is LARI'S green, which is actually based on a modular structure, which are these panels that are prefabricated. And they can be put together in many different ways, and I'll show you in the different configurations. But this is what helps people to really co-build, as I say, because the panels can be made by village artisans after they've been given some training, and then really it's the household that completes them, and you can see the beautiful decoration that then starts being done. And this is another configuration of the log, which is kind of put together because of this modular kind of character. And this, of course, is our zero carbon guest cottages at Zero Carbon Campus at MAKLI. And just wanted to show you the versatility of this particular, structure, the log panels, because if you use 8 of them, this makes a room 12 foot by 12 foot. And you can, of course, finish it any way that you like, because the structure itself is very strong, and we use a lot of thatch if you're working in villages. If you add 2 more of them, then it becomes a 12 by 18 room, which is for a classroom. And you can again finish it with whatever material you might find, whether it's stone or any kind of infill. And then, of course, this is a community center with a dome roof, which again all bamboo. And this is it's about 18 foot by 18 foot. And then if you put 3 of them together like this, then we get something which we call the INTBAU Center, which was built at MAKLI and was ready for the conference of 2019, the International INTBAU Pakistan Conference. And this is actually the INTBAU Center, the picture of it and its configuration. And for this, this is dedicated to His Royal Highness Prince Charles, because he's been so kind and helpful in our zero carbon mission. And then this is an amphitheater in DRR Park, Disaster Risk Reduction Park in SINDH. And what I wanted to show you was there is different ways of using bamboo. And this is, you must remember that I'm really trying to do really, really low cost buildings. But if you were architects who can have a little bit more money, you can do really spectacular structures with these materials. And this is a Zero Carbon Women's Center. And I just, this is an animation by Al Jazeera. And you can see how with the stilts, even if you get flood waters, everybody is safe on the upper level, and mostly all their belongings and everything can be stored there. Because with disaster risk reduction, and Eric has gone in detail into what he's been doing with disasters, it's very important for us to really prepare for them. And there has to be much more effort into preparation rather than just sort of post-disaster response. This is the Zero Carbon Campus at MAKLI. It just shows this big hangar-like structure, which is our marquee. And I just wanted to show you the interior of it, where we hold conferences. On the right bottom is the International INTBAU Pakistan International Conference held in 2019. And Harriet is also somewhere there. I think Eric is there too. So you can't see them. But this is quite a big structure, and it's surviving very well. And it's all open and breeze passes through, and it's very, very cool. And this is where we do all our trainings as well. All the poor are gathered here, and we carry out all our assemblies there. And then this is the award-winning Pakistan CHULAH, which Eric kindly mentioned. This is something that's changed the lives of many women, something like 70,000 of them and their families, because it's not only the CHULAH itself or the stove itself, but really the dignity that comes with it for the woman. That is something that's quite remarkable. So I think architecture can change and design can change the way we allow people to gain very many attributes. There are many different ones of them, but you can see that each one is a designer CHULAH. Each one has been decorated by the housewife, and this is where the creativity is. This is what co-building is all about. It's like a canvas that I have created, and then they have come in and used their own creativity to embellish it, and they're so proud of it too. These are again mud walls and bamboo roofs of different kinds with thatch and everything. This is something called the Green Karavanghar. Something like 40,000 of these have been built. These are all earth walls and bamboo joists and a flat roof, which is rendered with lime and mud and pozzolana. And then it's the same kind of structure, but you can see how every one is different. And then it's always tested by people who couldn't believe it, so they go up on the roof and test it. This is all bamboo. And then this is another structure with the earth walls and bamboo roof and thatch and so on. It's a school building. And then I just wanted to show you this, which is a earthquake-proof green Karavanghar. And I wanted to show you how a combination of earth and bamboo can give you such resilience. So we do the foundation as we normally do, and then which is all incidentally lime concrete and nothing else. And then we build in bamboo lattice layers at about every 3 feet. And this is all then finished off after the last layer. It's finished off with a bamboo reinforced lime concrete ring beam. And the roof is again made out of bamboo joists, which are then covered with normal, matting and then purlins and different kind of layers, which include the pozzolana layer at the top. And then we've got these bamboo lattice on the outside and inside, which is tied together, and that's what makes it very, very strong and very resilient. And then this is the shaking table test we conducted on it, because people could not believe that that kind of structure would survive earthquakes. And so model was scaled down to 50% of actual size, and it was subjected sequentially to ground motions corresponding to Kobe earthquake of 7.3 Richter scale. So levels first applied, you can see from 25% to 100%, then from 125% to 275%, and then even up to 670%. And I'll show you what happened if you'll bear with me. This is the actual test. So this is 100% of Kobe earth. Okay, nothing has happened to it. It's absolutely safe. It's perfectly all right. And then the next, there are many different ones after that, but then this is the 275%. This is almost 300% of 3 times the COVID. Okay. Then too, there's no scratch, there's nothing. It's safe. Everybody inside is safe also. And so the Vice Chancellor who was conducting it, he was very unhappy with the whole situation, said we've got to break it. So 670% of Kobe earthquake. And now, of course, it has problems because, as you can see, the walls are getting deformed, the earth is disintegrating, but the structure remains. The structure has not collapsed. And that's the important thing when we're working for disasters or in disaster areas. We've got to ensure safety of lives. So this is what bamboo and earth and lime can do. I just wanted to show it to you. Thank you so much. I hope I've not overrun too much, Harriet. Thank you indeed. Right.
Excellent, Yasmeen. That's a wonderful way to finish with the shaking table test. Thank you very, very much. And I hope that it will never get to the point of there being 670% of what Kobe earthquake was anywhere on this planet. Fingers really firmly crossed. Thank you, Yasmeen. Inspirational, and exactly what, as you identified, the architecture challenge, seeking to encourage all designers to be thinking about the challenges of unmet needs and also of climate, and combining those two together, and those challenges being global. So the design solutions in one part of the world needing to adapt those and to learn from each other. So much of what we saw from Eric, from Elsie, and from you for Pakistan, and many of the markers towards progress that Mina identified. That's what we need. Preparation as well is maybe making the point that it can't be about recovery after a disaster's happened, needing to be prepared for it. So certainly the architecture challenge is not before time in coming along as an initiative. We need this now, and not just this, we need other initiatives like it, and lots of excellent design proposals and solutions from all the participants on today that can take part, and many more. So we've got all speakers back on, I think, which is excellent, with video. So we're going to come now to some questions from anyone attending today who would like to ask something for all speakers or for one in particular. Please just type those into the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to those. But I wonder, I might, because I'm getting to share this, maybe I get the privilege of getting to ask a first one whilst people think of theirs. So maybe to put to each of you in turn, just thinking about your studies when you were actually training in, well, the degree that you took, maybe an element of that you found frustrating, that didn't necessarily lead to you getting where you are today, doing the work you're doing. And then if you've got a positive thing to share as well, something that was good about your studies, then it would be nice to hear as well for people on here. So why don't we start in reverse order? So Yasmeen, thinking back to your studies, which I know were in more than one country, what was something you found frustrating, something that didn't help you to become the architect that you are now?
Well, I was trained in England at Oxford School of Architecture, which is now Oxford Brookes University, and I was taught really to be a star architect. I mean, ego was totally inflated. I think I was totally insufferable. And then I come to Pakistan and I find the reality to be so different. Because here, with poverty levels being what they are, and especially I think in terms of design, I began to look at our own towns where there's so much to learn from. And I think that's what changed my perception of what architecture should be. But, you know, the way life is, I continue to practice and, you know, did some enormous structures and buildings. And of course, it was the disaster of 2005, where we lost 80,000 lives and something like 400,000 families were displaced, that, you know, I got involved with disasters, and that's what changed my life. That's where I think the work I'm doing, I think is now really rewarding. I'm not catering to or pandering to the taste of a few clients. My clients are now these poor people who I respect, and I feel I need to do the best that I can in terms of design for them. So it's a very rewarding experience. Yeah. Thank you.
So some things you can't learn in school. I guess no course will teach you. It's going to be what life brings to you later. And Oxford Brookes, obviously, they have now some wonderful courses there, and a lot of architecture programs have changed more recently. Yes, thank you, Elsie. How about you? Something that was frustrating about your training? Get you off. I'll send you a. So you're still muted for us. Let's get you off mute. There we go.
Well, I suppose the thing that was frustrating being at the AA was that a lot of the ideas that we're talking about now was so unfashionable in those days. So if you tried to talk about, you know, working with communities and working with women, or, you know, using local materials, it was all considered to be a bit sort of, you know, beneath your status as an architect, and what you were doing, what you were wanting to be doing, or what they were wanting you to do was to aspire to be a star architect and, you know, throw tall buildings in the air with concrete and steel and lots of pizzazz, you know. And you were put under a lot of pressure not to do projects which we would now consider to be sustainable and aim towards resilience and community. And I suppose the interesting thing, the wonderful thing about being at the AA was that there were just so many people from all different parts of the world. I mean, it was just like being in a big sweetie jar, you know, just hundreds and hundreds of young people with lots of fantastic ideas, who effectively became your friends for the rest of your life, even though you didn't know it then. So yeah, I mean, I do value that experience now, although it was at times frustrating.
No, a good answer. Nice to make friends. Do you think has that changed, thinking about education, especially maybe in the UK context? Do you think maybe now more there is sustainability is in fashion, and thinking about designing that way, is that becoming much more the norm?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's so much fashion as an imperative. Yeah. You know, I mean, some of the pictures that were shown, particularly, you know, the pictures that Mina showed at the beginning with the effects of climate change. And it was interesting listening to people from Germany, you know, when the floods happened in Germany, saying, but this is supposed to happen to poor people, not to people like us. And the fact is that people are now realizing that we're all people like us.
Yeah.
And, you know, we all have to bow to the imperatives of climate change and understand it, because as people say with COVID, you know, until we're all safe, nobody's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're all people like us. A very good point. Absolutely right. Thanks, Elsie. Eric, how about you, thinking to studies? What was a frustrating element that didn't help you to where you are?
Oops, am I unmuted? Yes, well, first of all, I would echo everything that Yasmeen and Elsie just said. I share those convictions deeply. If I had to contribute something, I would say the individualism bothered me or has baffled me since. I was less aware of it when I was like in the fishbowl, but I think you get out and you practice and you realize how much more rewarding and how much better design is in collaboration with others, in collaboration with your clients and your community and everything like that. And persistently, we organize design school and design training around individual efforts to somehow cultivate my, individual sense of design grown in a glass jar. Everything meaningful that I've done in my career, I've done in collaboration with others and with communities. And in hindsight, it seems like a huge miss that more of design school isn't organized around that ethos.
A good point, and relevant one to this architecture challenge too. We're hoping a lot of submissions will come in from teams, multidisciplinary teams, as many as you want collaborating together on the project. Thanks, Eric. And Mina, Elsie, how about you?
Thank you, Harriet. I would just actually echo everything that has been said by the previous speakers so far, but specifically what Eric had mentioned, because I even though I had amazing, I would say I was lucky to have a very great architectural education, which was then followed by a master's program on sustainable design and environmental engineering. That has gotten me to where I am today. I think the missed opportunity, perhaps rather a frustration, I would describe this as a missed opportunity, is that there was lack of interdisciplinary work and collaborative work at architecture schools. And I think it still exists today, unfortunately. And in real life, meaning outside of the school, there is no way that a single architect could ever imagine to address any of these, especially now, all these multi-layered challenges that we constantly talked about that are increasing in gravity and urgency. There is no way a single architect or an architectural designer would ever be able to appreciate, address, and provide holistic solutions. So an interdisciplinary integrated approach is very fundamental for our future, for our profession's future, and for our industry's future. And I think that was the missed opportunity. And the other sort of missed opportunity I would describe is this having the hands-on experience, which we didn't have any. I didn't have any, and I wish I had actually more hands-on experience going and visiting places. So going outside of the box or the bubble or the aquarium, however we want to describe it, and just go see places like the beautiful places Elsie, Yasmeen, and Eric had shown, New Orleans, Pakistan, Ghana. I think if architecture students can have that opportunity, not necessarily to physically visit, but learn about those places where their perception will drastically widen, I think. And that's one thing that I think currently exists in many architecture schools, that the context is very much refined by the physical location of the school.
No, that's a wonderful answer. I think if the four of you could collectively design a new architecture school, it would be a very good one. So something we can think about. A question from Robert for Elsie first. Robert wonders, Elsie, whether you've thought about whether rammed earth could be applied to something where you need a higher density form of living. So do you think that rammed earth, high rise or mid rise might be possible? It's an engineering aspect to that question too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great idea. It's a really great question. But I think, I mean, I'm just so inspired by what I've seen Yasmeen doing that I'm going to start off with, I'm really going to explore the idea, the combination of rammed earth and bamboo. And I really love the idea of almost making those panels, which, in Ghana, there are just so many skilled people. And what's really missing is access to that exchange and innovation. And I mean, I think working with engineers, that sense of having a multidisciplinary team, so that as an architect, if you have a germ of an idea and you have somebody who can take it that much further, it's almost as if people are just piggybacking on their skills and their ideas. And I think, and a forum like this is really great. Yes, and yes. Robert.
Good positive answer. Yeah. And another question from Veronica, which may be putting to, in fact, I think all four of you could have something really good to say on this. Veronica wondering whether you found it in design practice necessary or useful to measure the work that you do with the metrics of the sustainability agenda. and whether you've done so. So I know, Yasmeen, you brought up certainly the Sustainable Development Goals, and Mina, you had very clear trajectories for how things might be measured. But Veronica's wondering whether, if you have done those tests of your work versus some of these metrics, has it been helpful? Have those frameworks and methods been helpful or seemed appropriate? Have they fit? Has there been a match?
It's a very difficult question to answer, I think, but I would say that we have not done any kind of scientific studies of this, but I do know that communities who are able to build themselves, they have a sense of pride and satisfaction, and they find that when I first started promoting lime and earth and so on, I was told by international organizations, very big ones, that nobody will accept mud anymore in even villages in Pakistan. And lo and behold, we start working with lime and mud, and we get everybody up on the roof of a bamboo roof, which nobody believed will, take that kind of load. And then suddenly, everybody realized it is so strong. So I think the satisfaction that comes from communities, and especially with my the stove, the earthen CHULAH, which women build themselves, they have total command on how they do it. And there's amazing kind of respect that's grown for them. So I think there's a lot of value in working with communities, understanding what their needs are and responding to that rather than imposing something on them. So, I think I feel that, that's a good way to maybe judge whether it's been successful or not.
Yeah, a really good perspective to begin. I wonder, Mina or Elsie or Eric, do you add anything?
I'm more than happy to also add to what Yasmeen had mentioned. I think it's important, I talked about this in my presentation briefly as well. I think it's really important that we actually measure the performance of our design decisions along every step of the way. And we do this in the company that I work for, SOM, on every single project, whether it's an urban planning project or a building project or an interior design project. So at every scale, we define key metrics and key outcomes that we want to achieve. And that's why I was giving the example of the very specific, the 35 kilowatt hour per square meter per year target, because we define that kind of specific target, of course, based on the context and the program and the project's needs, what those achievable targets could be. But then we always work to those targets and measure the design evolution against those targets. And once the building or the space is completed and constructed, we actually go back and measure and see that what we intended at design stage has become a reality, hopefully. And if not, there is always an opportunity to fine tune, to educate the end users so that they can interact and also improve the performance of that space or the built environment on an ongoing basis. So I think it's really, really important.
And in some cases, maybe looking again at the standards, which need to move on, as our knowledge and sort of the responsiveness changes in design move on as well. I guess that, a two-way thing.
Actually,
Thanks,
that's a really interesting question. And I wonder if the thing that comes to mind is at Just Ghana, we've set up these, we encourage people to set up these green clubs, school clubs, sort of after school clubs, where kids grow their own food and they learn about the environment. And I just wonder, I think it would be a really great idea to support the children to do those metrics, to measure the effectiveness and sustainability. I mean, at the moment, we're teaching how to use rainwater gauges and all that kind of thing. But for children and young people to be able to understand how you measure and you track the sustainability of the buildings that have been made with their parents and with their community would give them much more agency, rather than relying on us to come back and measure it and do those metrics. If the children were empowered to do that and the community was empowered, then the feedback would be much more constant, I think, and would give them a much more vibrant exchange and make people more self-reliant, I think, which is something I'm very keen on.
A great idea. One maybe to pilot with Just Ghana projects, Elsie, and then you can report back on how that goes, and you can replicate your great model. We've got two materials-based questions. So I'm first going to say to Dee, the question about hempcrete. Tune in, Dee, to the session that'll be later in this series on materials, because we'll talk about hempcrete then. And then coming to another one from Robert, this for Yasmeen, just wondering, whether it was a specific species of bamboo, of the many thousands I think that there are, that you were using for that lattice reinforcement.
Yes, that's a very good question, because there's a lot of bamboo available even in Pakistan, but there's only some species that are good. And surprisingly, the one that is considered to be really the best is the Bangladeshi species. I'm not quite sure what the technical or generic term for that would be, but that seems to be really good for building, because you have to make sure that it's sturdy, and the thickness of the wall of the bamboo is very important. So when we do that, we check that, and if that's okay, then I think it's okay to use as a structural member. Because remember, all the load is going on to them. I mean, normally we are using now, especially with these prefabricated bamboo panels, they're load bearing. And so it becomes very important. And also even with the roof joists, which we have multiple, 4 bamboo joists, there too, it's very important to make sure that integrity of bamboo is intact and that it can be used in that way. But I couldn't really say which particular generic name would be for that.
Well, that's lots, yes, lots out there, and again, one for the materials session that will come up later, Robert. So do tune in back to that. And Yasmeen, you and I are looking at bamboo species for Scotland right now as well. So it really is an around the world species and useful material. Really good question from Ali Reza, which I think could be for any one of you to answer, or all of you to answer. Ali Reza making the point that there's so much lip service that's paid nowadays within architectural practice, especially larger commercial firms, to sustainability, to greenness, and just how easy it is often to greenwash by using language that says that such and such a project is sustainable, is green. So how do you think, there is so much knowledge about what needs to be done and some of the ways in which changes to design could be achieved. How do you think we can get from where we are now really to a change within mainstream architectural production and those building typologies? Very quick answers. I mean, that's a topic unto itself and a really good question, one that needs discussing. But does any of you have a sort of quick, immediate thought on that? I'm sure you've all spent time thinking about it.
Well, I think the leadership will come from forums like this. And I think it needs to, those big machines aren't very nimble, and they're not structured for change. So actually, I think it's an opportunity for people like us, if you like, to be running with those ideas and taking the leadership. And I think that's how change will come.
Yeah, good point. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think all 4 of us spoke in some way about systemic change. And I think one of the reasons that, our current modes of construction persist is because the systems are built around that, right? So, the shelves at the hardware store are designed for, a certain kind of lumber or metal stud or something like that, the dimensions of a truck, the width of the roads, all of these things. So to bring those lessons of the vernacular into, say the building of a city of 10 million people or something like that, really does, I mean, it's not lip service. It requires complete rethinking of the systems that actually create that architecture, right? So to replicate it at scale, I think it's entirely doable and absolutely necessary. And we just have to kind of expand the design lens and say, okay, well, if we want a 40-story timber tower, what are the production facilities? What are the storage facilities? Like, what's the marketing around that? Like, all sorts of questions kind of come up if we want to see that realized more than one building at a time, I think.
Yeah, no, good point. And that ties nicely to a comment that's come from Jamila at Archeam at the University of Liverpool, just pointing out that students really wanting, pardon the aircraft flying past that's happening, I'm not sure if you can hear that outside my window. Jamila making the point that students are eager for hands-on opportunities, that in her experience of getting them, and a few of you alluded to this, that actually getting hands dirty, being in workshops, learning about places, if not visiting them necessarily in person, but having practice using the materials, these sustainable, natural, replenishable materials, to have the confidence to design with them. So maybe to start back at that level of students, then having more professionals, practitioners coming out that are well versed, some of the children, Elsie, that you're going to teach, not just to use rainwater gauges, but also to measure sustainability performance, coming on, some of them hopefully to be design professionals and being equipped to work in the world that we're all in, that's facing all of us right now. Thanks very much, Eric, for thoughts on that. Maybe we've got a question from Lisa in Australia, who is up very early or very late, I think it was. And Lisa's observed that in Australia they've seen an explosion of interest in clay due to the COVID pandemic, which is an interesting connection to be making. So Lisa wonders, how can we transfer the momentum from this interest in clay to design in architecture with also the addition of lime? And that's maybe one directed at you, Yasmeen. This is Lisa Skillern. So she wonders, how do we transfer this momentum of interest in a material into design and architecture and getting lime into the mix?
Yes, I think it's very important as we look at alternative materials, we should really be looking at earth very, very seriously. And as Elsie has shown in Ghana and so many countries, mud is everywhere. And the only problem with that is that it disintegrates whenever there's a rain or there's flooding and so on. And that's why nobody really wants to use it. But we found that if you mix earth with lime, and lime, of course, is difficult because of the way that we use it for conservation work, for heritage conservation, because it has to be wet slaked lime and it has to be really mature before you can use it. But the way we worked out now, and especially for humanitarian work, we do something called dry slaking. And that dry slaking means that you can do it overnight and it gives you really a lot of strength. And we've actually just put in a lot of tutorials, and Lisa, I think, knows about them, on YouTube, where you can see how these things are done. And I really would like anybody who's interested to have a look at them, because I feel the more knowledge of this kind we can put into sort of open source material, the more people might be willing to actually experiment with those things. And I really aim now that everybody in Pakistan, every poor person in Pakistan, I want to build for themselves. I don't think the state will ever get to them. So if we can provide this kind of facility or this knowledge and this skill or through these tutorials, we could really make a lot of difference in our communities.
Yeah, the power of the digital world. So again, we're all of us gathered online today. We're lucky that this medium exists. Thank you, Yasmeen. A question from Thea, maybe to end on, and to come to each one of you. Thea wonders if there's one piece of advice that each of you would give to anyone planning to enter the design competition, part of the architecture challenge. What would it be? And it's okay if you repeat. I know some of you gave good bits of advice in your presentations. Feel free to repeat those bits of advice or to steal someone else's if I come to you first. But let's maybe start with Mina. What one piece of advice?
Thank you, Harry. Thank you for that question, Rosafina. There isn't a silver bullet solution to anything. So I would encourage all of them to think about a variety of different strategies, systems, methods, technologies, approaches, however you want to call them, and find the best synergies among all of them and bring them all together in one design solution. And so that's one thing I would highly encourage. And I think that's inevitably will also encourage them to work cross-disciplinary manner. Thank you.
Absolutely. Collaboration. Thanks, Mina. Eric, advice from you.
I would say do your research. I mean, there are a lot of ideas out there, and typically when I see new fresh ideas coming out, because of the things that I've done in my career, I can kind of make connections and say, okay, well, this person did that and this person did this. They don't teach a lot of this stuff in schools, so we're not organically introduced to it, but there are people out there that are experts. If you're thinking about something to do with bamboo, you would be a fool not to go over everything on Yasmeen's website and study everything that she's ever done. Take what your forebears have done and do the next thing. And I think that's how we make forward motion as a field.
Great point. Elsie.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think Yasmeen's work on bamboo is just such an inspiration for me. But aside from that, I think the idea about engaging with people from other disciplines is really, really important. And this is something that we've just begun to realize how absolutely critical it is to this area of work. So we've always thought of multidisciplinary as working with engineers or working with other people within the construction profession. But I think increasingly working with doctors, nurses, midwives, working with people who not just use the building, but are just part of the community and know stuff that we don't know. And we don't, you know, to quote one of an American politician, that we don't know, we don't know. So it's kind of reaching out and allowing your work to be affected by what you learn, and not to be afraid of taking those risks, I think.
Absolutely. So collaborative, cross-disciplinary, and thinking a bit more widely about what cross-disciplinary means, people in the community. Yeah, absolutely. Yasmeen, piece of advice from you.
I was just thinking, you know, we are talking in the context of this challenge, which is for housing, which really means, I mean, it depends where you are, of course, but majority of the world really requires very simple solutions so that you have, you know, you can use locally sourced material, don't try to import anything. You look at the context, you look at the community for which you're working. You have to learn from them and you have to understand their needs before you can actually design. So it's a lot of hard work. It's not going to be easy because you have to change the whole perspective as to how you will deal with the problem. And you know, since I believe very strongly in tradition, and I've learned so much from our vernacular tradition in Pakistan, that I feel that unless you understand the context of you know, of each country or each civilization, basically, it's very difficult to design in a manner which will be suitable or will be sustainable. So I would suggest, especially those who are coming from the South or have these problems of poverty and illiteracy and ill health and God knows how many other things, that for them, they'll have to come down from their pedestal of what they've been taught in schools. And as everybody, Eric and Elsie and also Mina have talked about, then what you have to do is to go and learn for yourself. And of course, try to do as much research as possible. These are non-engineered structures. You won't find any engineers actually supporting anything like this, especially if you're saying you're not going to use cement. So if the moment you say that and you don't want to use steel, no engineer worth his salt will actually help you. So you have to see how you are able to manage these things. So look at tradition, look at the communities, and then try to design something. It may be something that, you know, you'll have to build to see whether it survives or not. I don't know.
That's good. Wonderful advice from all of you. Thank you. And Thea, I hope that helps. We're looking forward to your submission. Well, with that last question, it comes to the point of giving huge thanks to Mina, to Eric, to Elsie, and to Yasmeen as our speakers, to all of you as participants, and also to Juliet Butler and Alice Preston-Jones, who've made everything work for us today, this whole session running, thanks to them. So I hope that this session has given all of you that have been on here the confidence and the incentive to take on the architecture challenge, to join upcoming webinars, and to think about putting in a design submission for the competition, and some sense of the next steps towards positive change. I think all of us not wanting to feel frozen in the face of how much needs to be done. So there are things that can be done one at a time. So we have 6 more webinars to come in this series, and the second is going to be on the 27th of August, looking at vernacular, local, traditional, and Indigenous design. So I hope that many of you will join us for that. You can register to take part in the Architecture Challenge on the website, which is challenge.intbau.org, and that will mean you get all the details of the upcoming webinars as well. So do come along to the next, and we'll give certificates to anyone that comes to at least 4 of those, and CPD accreditation becoming possible as well. So challenge.intbau.org, please do check that, and thanks once again. And in fact, here come the details, easier than me saying it. Now you can see that website to find us online as well as on social media. So thank you very, very much to all speakers, all participants, and look forward to seeing everyone at the next sessions. Thank you very much.